we should be on. If you can hear me, hopefully all this audio is recording because Zoom's terrible for deleting my audio. All right. So what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Christian Mystic Podcast. Today I have with me. He goes on by TikTok under the name Seraphim Fear Not, and he's coming to talk about his encounter with Christ as well as his experience being born into a cult and having to deconstruct and find um, his own relationship, right, with Christ. So what's up, man?
Not much. How about you?
Not much. We kind of covered that a little bit, I guess, earlier.
Yeah, we
We
did.
kind of had an introduction before this. Um, yeah. So we were talking about earlier about the sort of bondage that I experienced, and you sort of had a similar experience within Jehovah's Witness, where it felt almost like the pagan restrictions on the pagan items of Jesus, that they've syncretized all this pagan stuff that almost became like a oppression, and it wasn't really helping with faith, it was hurting faith.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting because, I mean, the theology of Jehovah's Witnesses is that, there was at one point in time a pure version of Christianity, and that over time that became perverted. And so they usually point the finger at Christendom, specifically the Catholic Church. And what makes cults like Jehovah's Witnesses very dangerous is that they mix fact and fiction. And so they can put in their literature verifiable history, but then they'll throw in their own contributions. And people don't know how to distinguish the difference. It's like, did you know that they actually put a piece of literature out that showed Jesus on a stake, but meanwhile in that very same book it showed Jesus on a cross. So they just selectively chose a page in a book to be like, well, look, in history, this was the illustration of Jesus. No, I mean, there was all kind. They were. It was just a book just demonstrating all of the different types of execution styles.
Yeah,
And
of crusade.
as one of my good associates on TikTok, her handle is tax the churches, tax dot the dot
Oh
churches.
yeah, I love her.
She
Very
talked a
consistent.
lot. She's great for deconstruction, but she talked about how the cross is a distinctly Roman method of execution,
Yeah,
because in Jewish culture they did hang people up on a tree on a stake and they would stone them to death. But that's not how Jesus died, is it?
no,
Jesus was executed on a cross and there was no stoning involved whatsoever. So those are completely two different types of execution. So that's just another thing I think that Jehovah's Witnesses have kind of like I said, they've mixed facts and fiction. And because of the culture that exists within that religion, people don't really have the freedom to do their own research.
yeah,
So
it's
they
like the
will just
dogma has
accept at
created a
face
binding to
value.
them. Yeah,
Yeah. They'll
it's like a
just
catch twenty
accept
two.
at face value what they're told in the literature. Whatever spin doctor, they'll just accept it. So that for me, my deconstruction has just been very eye-opening, because I've learned that a lot of the things that were deeply entrenched beliefs, I've had to uproot them because there's no basis for having those beliefs. So it's been hard, but it's also been very gratifying. So
Right. It's the I tell people it's the movement from, that agnostic kind of underlying subconscious perspective where you're like, "Oh, I don't know, that could be real, but I'm going to trust in it." The kind of blind faith. And it's a move
great.
towards very concrete, what I would call gnostic, knowledge. Just
Sure.
this knowledge of God. And
And it's important for me to separate like, I have my own personal belief system, but there's also, academic history. And, like, you kind of have, it's like there's always a very small part of myself that acknowledges that we don't really know anything. And I think it's always good to have that little part of yourself that acknowledges that, because if you're completely dogmatic, then I just think that that's like pretty much the worst. Because when you're unwilling to accept any alternative viewpoint, you're just going to become set in your ways. And it's no longer about finding truth, it's just about sticking with what's comfortable to you, you know?
There was a good scholar, McClellan, on TikTok for a while. He said data over dogma, and I really supported
Hmm.
that because research over what you've been told, research over tradition, research over because tradition has a pretty bad history if you look at it.
Sure.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I think I follow him too. And I think he's the one that's always kind of like getting into little spats with fundamentalists, because, they go on TikTok and they start spouting off their stuff. And he
he's a
just goes,
scholar.
"Nope, nope, never happened, not a thing." And I'm just like, wow.
That's great. Yeah.
Because I wish we had a fact checker like that. Like that person needs to exist in every church. You know what I
In every
mean?
comment section on TikTok,
Yes.
regardless. I've had people argue me black is white. That, yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. And in that culture, you can get to that mindset. You're just willing to go along with the group. So
It's fine. But yeah, awesome. Totally get that. He would. We'll talk about that more later too. I'll just cut that out of the thing.
oh
The
yeah,
what? You're
you're
good.
good.
Okay. But yeah, I totally get that, and sort of had the same experience within where I grew up, evangelical Baptist, and it got so overly dogmatic that it felt like people were judging me every time I walked into the church building. Even
Sure.
even if they had smiling faces on, I knew they were talking to somebody about me or doing something about me, gossip or some kind of slander, to where I didn't feel safe ever in that church, and
Hmm.
the majority of it I think came from my mother and how she brought me up in Christianity, because she sort of taught it to me like she was my view of God for the longest time, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Not like
Yeah,
she
that's
brought me
kind of
up,
your first exposure
yeah,
to
to any kind of
to your
authoritative
religion.
figure at all, any kind of authority in my life. And when I had that bad view of God, I thought for a while, I was like, is he evil? Does he really hold to what she holds to? Is he this kind of person? And I went down the beginning of the my little Gnostic journey there for a while, wondering if God was evil and searching out the Gnostic Gospels um
Sure.
and everything. And I really wanted to figure out, and I had the Lord wake me up one day. It was like I couldn't keep going with what I was doing. It was like physically hurting my body. I couldn't keep doing what I was doing, and I just kept looking deeper, and I guess I sort of realized, if in the worst case scenario, if God's evil, regardless, how do you tell a gardener what to do with his garden? And then it was all of a
Hmm.
sudden I had all these revelations of how much he actually loves us, how much he does love us. And then I was shown kind of not only by this, I have this cat keep hopping up on me, but not only in a vision, but also, just through some friends who were, educating me, that the demiurge is Satan. When Jesus says the Lord of this world in John, he talks about the Lord of this
Hmm.
world, the Lord of the Maya, the illusion. That's the demiurge. There's a God of the flesh, a God of this physical world, and so and where a lot of Christians have some problem with that, the concept of the monad and the dyad and the demiurge
Hmm.
and the original divine spark, I can kind of help give some scientific understanding. It would be like, if you can describe light as a wave, the wave and the particle, which would be that part of the wave as it's being depicted in time, however you really want to view it, but that's what I think is going on. If you take that wave is a serpent. That's that serpent from the Garden of Eden that was tricking man to fall into physicality, to fall into materialism, material nature. And there's a source where all of those waves come from. That's known as the monad, the interior soul of the human being, and
Hmm.
where those waves radiate from. So you can now worship the effect, or you worship the cause. Now the effect has had to have done something to the cause to make it an effect, right? And this is sort of the science that the devil can only take with what God has created, twist it to make whatever he wants. But
Sure.
it was an original pure divine state, and we've fallen from that into this vibratory universe. It's not for me to say that we can get out into that, but
There's definitely a lot of things from Gnosticism that I resonate with. And it's kind of like, I mean, it's a bit cafeteria style for me, where there's elements that I pick that I like. And then if there's elements I don't like, I don't include them into my personal belief system. So for me, like, what was really eye-opening learning about Gnosticism was just the simple fact that, like, there are probably many, many gods. And the world that we live in is just one world out of many. And that and we have us and then we have source. There are many onion layers that exist between us and source. And so while yes, we do have that direct connection because of the divine spark, I also have to acknowledge that we're not the center of the multiverse, you know.
right,
There's many worlds, and it would be foolish to think that we're the center of the universe. So for me, that was kind of eye-opening because I always thought, I mean, for most Christians, it's very simple. Jesus, or God, he brought forth the word created the universe, and bada bing, bada boom, but um, Gnosticism really complicates things, where it kind of brings up this idea that there's a source and then there's all these virtues that are like gods in their own right. And of
right.
course,
So it can be very
the story about the demiurge and Yaldabaoth and
I
all
tell
that. But
people it's more important about what your belief and more in Gnosticism, more specifically what your knowledge does for you
sure.
versus how much of it you have. It's the difference between someone who's filled with ungodly wisdom and godly wisdom. Good fruit can't come from a bad tree, bad fruit can't come from a good tree. So,
For me, what's really toxic Gnosticism is, like, basically this idea that God is evil, and if you worship God, then you're worshiping something that's evil. And I think that that's a very black and white mentality to have. I think that there's a little bit more nuance than that,
I think
you
it
know.
adds to people's bad view of God too. They've
Sure. Oh,
made that
absolutely.
perception their entire
You
life.
know, but of course, in my deconstruction, I've adopted a lot of views about the metaphysical, and I've learned about egregores and everything. And for me, finding out that probably a lot of these gods that people are worshiping are just the product of centuries and centuries of human conscious thought and belief. If you believe something strong enough, it will exist. And so, in a way, it is a real thing.
Have
Like, I
you
do
looked
believe that
into
the
any of
God that Jehovah's Witnesses worship is real in a sense, because it's a God that they've created, you know,
yeah,
and just like any type of egregore, it can exert power over you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the one true source.
right?
So
Have
that's
you
just
seen any
another
of
little kind of.
Dr. Michael Heiser's work on the Divine Council?
Yeah, yeah, I've heard of Michael, and I've watched some of his videos, and I think that he's very I think his information is really valuable, and anyone that's deconstructing should definitely check out his stuff.
100%, 100%. Well, just a little bit about my personal journey that led me sort of into the Gnostic version of direct knowledge. At least that's how I use Gnosticism to mean. Gnostic to me is an experience of direct knowledge that you can't you can't deny, something that you can't be like, oh, that was something else, because like to me, with my experience, if I were to call the thing I experienced something else, it would be blasphemy. So
Mm-hmm.
I consider a very tangible experience a Gnostic experience, an experience of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
experiential, direct experience, and really, it was probably the only thing that actually got me on the right path because I had no real direction. I had nobody, no role model who was in front of me as like a Christian around my area who could be the best embodiment of Christ that I needed to see at that moment in time. So I think that's
Right.
why God appeared to me when He did. This was about 2.5 years ago, and I was staying at my friend Hayden's house. Me and my parents had a falling out, and he was kind enough to let me live there for a while and work a job and pay rent. So I was there for a while, and I lived upstairs and above their garage. And I was using the restroom one day, and this is before I got into any sort of, esoterics or anything. And I'm sorry if that was TMI, but while I was in there, I had this weird sensation that there was something else in the room with me, and I had a spirit sort of been attacking me in my dreams for a long time, and I guess trying to oppress me. I guess it sort of happened around the time I moved into his house, and they've had quite a bit of paranormal, supernatural, experiences happen in the house, and I remember it was like I felt like it was coming against me. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to put it the best way. I could feel that it wanted the worst for me, the absolute worst, most evil things I couldn't even comprehend it because I haven't even experienced that kind of evil. But I just
Mm-hmm.
knew like this thing, like it stinked. I don't know how else to put it. Like spiritually, it was dirty, it was horrid, and it wanted the worst for me. And I remember turning around and I said, because I hadn't met a demon before this, I half didn't even believe they existed. And I turned around and I said, in Jesus' name, you leave, because that was what I was told to say. And believe you me, it worked. Whether you want to get into the oh, that's not his real name. His name was Yehoshua, it was Joshua. Well, I knew him as Jesus at the time, and that thing vanished. And within seconds, like my whole vision, my whole conscious waking reality was being violently shook by the sound of a shofar, a Jewish trumpet, like how it's supposed to be blown in Revelation, blowing so loud that it was shaking like the very fabric of the reality I was looking at. I thought it was the rapture. I laid down and crossed my arms across my chest, and I uh, I laid down, and after a few minutes, when I wasn't taken, I wanted to verify the experience, so I went downstairs to my buddy Hayden, who I knew was also a Christian, and I was like, "Well, if he's down there, then that means that we're good." So
Mm-hmm.
I went down there, and the Spirit told him immediately, and I believe it was the Holy Spirit told him immediately what had happened to me upstairs, just sort of through telepathy, and he knew what had happened, and he also was getting sort of having these also psychic downloads, whatever you want to call it, that I was having when I had this experience. But the second I came in the room to talk to him, it was like I saw this blue light off in the distance, and it's the best way I could put it, off in like a spiritual distance, like it was very close but very far at the same time, and the most immense love I've ever felt in my entire life. Like there's no love that can compare to that feeling. That feeling drove my content, my ministry, and even all my beliefs for about 2.5 years after this experience. I'm still being led by it.
Mm-hmm.
And it spoke to me, and it said, you had to experience that upstairs, for a reason. I wanted to kind of introduce you to the spiritual world, was kind of what it told me. And it's hard to put into words because, again, it wasn't words, but it told me I was going to go through a very hard period of time in my life. And at the end of it, when I come out of it, it's going to be all worth it because everything that I have done would be for Him, Yeshua, Jesus, Christ, and everything would be worth it in the end. That this was a mission almost that He was putting me on to go and seek out knowledge and reveal it to people. And I believe that's what sort of happened with the sacred secretion and the esoterics and the metaphysics and all that, because I wasn't apprenticed under anyone. I wasn't studying under anyone, but various different authors of different translations of sacred mystical books, like the Sefer Yetzirah, the Sefer Bahir, um, the Zohar, and things like that.
Mm.
And I didn't have anyone schooling, like I wasn't being schooled by anyone. I wasn't underneath them other than by the Holy Spirit. And I truly do believe, in some kind of practice where people go insane from practicing it wrong very easily, lose their minds. I know I was divinely guided in what I found to bring concrete proof to assist the unveiling of Christ to everyone, the existence, the gnosis of the Christ, that he existed, that he walked, that he was real, and that he was God, at least in my belief.
And would it be crazy to suggest that maybe because of where you were at in your life, it allowed that pathway to be opened?
Yeah.
Because, I just think to myself, my personal journey, I like you mentioned already, I grew up in a very toxic cult, and I worshiped a God that was basically, well, it was their God,
Mhm.
and I wasn't having very much success with that, because I would pray to God all the time, and I just did never feel like he was really listening. And then I think to myself, I almost wonder if some of these religious groups are almost like a lead box or something
Oh,
that's blocking out the, I mean, I don't know. It's like I feel like there's powerful entities that are blocking people from receiving spiritual guidance, because I feel like my decision to leave that environment, well, I'm not just going to say leave. I had to escape that environment, because you can't just leave a cult. You have to escape it. And I feel that ever since I've left, I have had this profound, I've had multiple profound spiritual experiences. And of course, I've had a lot of breakthroughs. And I just think to myself, it has to be where I'm at right now in my life, that it's the right place and the right time. So for you, it was the right place and the right time to get that message, because you had gone through your own personal experiences. So
yeah, nothing is coincidence. There's a verse, I
sure.
think it's in Psalms, and don't count me on that because I'm not exactly sure where this specific verse is. But it says, the eyes of the Lord go to and fro over all the earth to search for those who he can trust. And that
Sure.
may be slightly paraphrased, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
very good verse that I've held dear for a while. And really, when God does find someone who he can trust, he does reveal what he can to them. And that
Sure.
was something I learned too, is during this, the more I gave to God, the more I got out of my studies, the more I got out of my meditations, the more I got out of my prayer, spending time with him, the more I got out of reading the Bible. And I would get more knowledge the more I gave to him in that instance, because it was like an act of faith. I think blind faith can be as just as bad as dead faith sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just feel like it's like you said, you kind of have to be in the right place, and I feel like we've both been on that journey, and it's still an ongoing journey. But it's like when you experience something like that and you know that it's real, and it has a profound effect on you mentally and emotionally. I mean, how can anyone deny that,
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah. So
Can't
for me,
dispel.
not that. So just recently, and this is kind of what I think broached this whole conversation, is that you had put up on your TikTok that one of your spiritual experiences involved encountering Vishnu, and how that transformed into Jesus, and that was a message that you were being received, that you
Yeah,
were
it's
being
very
sent,
specific.
that, your things look different to different people, and you need to understand that, I'm appearing to you looking like what you think of Jesus to be, your Messiah. For someone else in the world, that is going to be different.
Yeah, it's like
And,
say, you know, the Hindu people didn't have a Messiah. They don't
sure,
believe in that. So like if you're coming to somebody being like, "Oh, listen, there's a savior and you're going to die if you don't accept him." They're like, "Who?" And it's some Jewish guy, you know.
right.
It's
Yeah. Like, that's not a
it's a lot
message
of
that,
perspective.
sometimes it's like they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It's like you kind of have to, it's like, I think that God has the capacity to kind of tailor his message for the people he's talking to.
Right.
And, depending on where you're at in the world, the message can't be the same. There is not, because I mean, it's like different languages, it's a proven fact that if you speak a different language, you think differently. Like your brain actually operates differently. How you see the world is different. So there's profound diversity in this world. So, but just to go back to, that whole spiritual experience that you posted, it was crazy because I watched that video that you posted, and then shortly after I had my spiritual experience, which was very similar, very similar.
For
And
sure.
that's why I had to reach out to you, because I just thought this is almost, it's shades of what you experienced, where I had been, going through like a personal crisis, and I was doing some meditation, and I felt myself astral project, and I felt like I was in a place that was safe. I'm not going to say it was heaven, but it was some place that felt like heaven, that was, you know, safe. And so that's when I encountered what appeared to me to be Jesus, and I basically just ran to him. Like, I just grabbed onto him, and I was like, um, are you really Jesus?
It reminded me of the story of the lady who just wanted to reach out and grab the hem of his garment.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's exactly what I did. I ran up and I grabbed his tunic, like he was wearing exactly like what you would picture him to look like. I grabbed onto it and I was like, "Are you really Jesus?" And it was almost comedic, because he was like, "Yeah, last time I checked, I'm pretty sure I am."
Right, yeah.
But then he kind of got serious, and he was saying that, like, listen, I'm appearing to you as Jesus, but you need to understand that I appear differently to different people, you know? And so for you, this is the best way for you to kind of experience what you need to experience. Like, this is something that's familiar to you. I don't know if you've seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, but it's a beautiful movie. It's a movie about a woman who, she is an atheist, but she is selected to kind of connect with these aliens, and the aliens don't actually show up physically. They actually show up as her father,
Hmm.
because they felt like that was the most appropriate way to connect to her, was so it's like that made sense to me. So anyway, long story short, so
And
we had a heart to heart, through this kind of astral projection, and it felt as real as us talking right now,
oh yeah, I
and I
feel
could
it from.
feel the emotions and everything. And we had a heart to heart, and it was personal. And I said at the end, well, can you heal me? And it was like, without question, I can heal you. And I was kind of expecting the typical response of, well, I can't do that because, you know, I'm not here to fix your problems, because that's what I was raised to believe, is that God doesn't fix your problems. He helps you
Yeah,
deal with them. And so basically you just have to accept that, you know, there's obstacles and there's problems in this world, and you're never going to surmount them really, but God will help you deal with them. But having that experience, it was like immediately he I felt healed, like I had that experience of having the light kind of going all around me, feeling that comforting light. And mind you, there was no light in my room, like there was a small bedside table lamp, you know, and the fact that I was experiencing all of this immense light around me, even though I had my eyes closed, I could just sense it and feel all of the light around me. And it did give me immense peace. And shortly after that, that experience of feeling the light, then he prayed for me and he told me that he felt really, really bad that I was not feeling the love because he said, I just want you to understand how loved you are. And I'm sorry that you haven't experienced that. And so that was really comforting. And so when I kind of woke up and came to from that astral projection, I felt this immense peace, like I just felt peace of mind. And I immediately wrote down everything that I experienced. I wrote down the full conversation because I didn't want to lose it. I was like, I got to hold on to this because it was so special. But one of the big takeaways for me from that was that he said my primary purpose for coming to this world was to heal. And I don't know why that doesn't really seem like a profound statement, but it kind of was because for me growing up, I was always told that Jesus healed people because he needed to demonstrate that he was being backed by God. Like he was doing that as a way to almost establish his credibility and
Like
his
an ulterior
legitimacy.
motive or something. Like he's some kind of like
Right. Like he's got to
so
prove that
yeah.
he's actually the son of God. So he did all of that to prove that. I don't know where that comes from. Like I don't think that that's in the Bible whatsoever.
No,
I just
I think it's inferences drawn from where
sure.
He says to Mary when he's making the water into wine. He says it my time has not yet come. So they think, oh, he means the time of his miracles so that he can show that he's the prophesied one. Yeah. But
Sure.
why didn't he come and do some kind of materialistic miracle like make the rich people richer or something, like
Sure.
anything like that? Like why
Yeah,
wasn't
all of his acts of healing were to help other people, to
absolutely
alleviate suffering and suffering. And so for me, that was a big takeaway because I realized that, like, yeah, you did come to heal people. Like, I feel like that's kind of gotten lost in the sauce with most of Christianity, as with most things. It's like, well, Jesus was here to educate people and he was there to send his message and, this and that and the other. But they don't really dwell too much on the healing, although that was a major part of what he did,
yeah.
was that he has the capacity to heal people. And that hasn't ended. He's continuing to heal people, and it's not like this. It's just like I feel like Christianity, in a way, has really gotten away from that, where they don't even want to talk about healing
Yeah,
because
when
it's
I'm telling
like,
you,
oh,
man,
that's like what fringe groups do.
that
Like
both
these
hit me
groups that
in
like
my
believe that you
experience.
can cut
Yeah.
yourself and you won't get hurt and stuff like that. But I'm not talking about that type of healing. I'm talking about spiritual healing,
Right.
like the remedy that you need from your suffering. Because like you said, you were being antagonized by a malicious entity, energy, whatever you want to call it. And you called on a higher power and you were able to experience that negative entity disappear from your vicinity,
My
you
life,
know?
my psyche, everything. I will let you
Sure,
know I have about 2 minutes and 30 seconds left on
sure.
this specific Zoom call, so we can call back and then keep finishing the recording right after if that works.
Yeah, and then just like you said, just movie magic.
Yeah. And
Just stitch it
I
together.
want to touch on where you were talking about where he's like, I'm sorry you haven't felt the love, you know?
Hmm.
That was the whole reason he died. I never felt that love until he showed up for me. But yeah, yet when he showed up for me, it was also that same sort of mourning, like I'm sorry, mourning, like grieving, like I'm sorry you didn't get that. That was the whole point. Almost like this
Yes.
kind of just put out feeling like why did I why did I do all that? But
And it was so like relevant and on point because in my personal crisis, I was kind of just speaking aloud to myself and I was saying, I don't feel loved. I don't feel like I'm going to ever receive love. I'm always going to be alone. And so the fact that he brought that up and really touched on that, because he understood that was something that I was experiencing more so than anything was the lack of love.
found out he
And
knows our hearts better than we do.
right,
It's amazing.
yeah.
Thank you.
So, I mean, there's going to be skeptics that are going to say that, that was just all in your head. And listen, I have to admit and acknowledge that there's validity to that conclusion. But you know what? Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe
Just
it
because it's
really
in your head
is
doesn't mean it's not real. Right.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And also, one of the things people always say is, what if God, or Jesus or whatever you worship is kind of just the elevated or deified version of the world that we live in, ourselves, the world that we live in? Are you talking to a higher version of yourself? Is Jesus just a representation of the highest version of humanity? The
We're
most
seated with
elevated
Christ in
version of
heavenly places.
humanity?
Yeah. We're seated with Christ in heavenly places, so that higher self is quite biblical.
Exactly.
I want to touch on really quickly. You said you were worried, that people might think that this is, or discredit this spiritual experience because it might have been all in your head or something. Um, Really, I mean, spiritual experiences, you know, I wouldn't. Rare is not the right word, but they are rare. But when you have one, there's nobody who can. You can't really say, "Oh, you didn't have one," or "That's not right," or "That's not." That wasn't biblical. That wasn't Jesus. Nobody can say that unless, for instance, you had Baba Yaga or somebody, your grandfather, pop up to you and tell you to slit your throat or your wrists or sacrifice something to him. I completely understand that. But if somebody's coming and telling you the gospel, the story of the gospel, which is love, that's a whole nother level where I feel like, you know that's borderline blasphemy, because where the Pharisees denied Christ's divinity, they they blasphemed the Holy Spirit. They said, "Oh, you're working with the power of demons using Beelzebub." Well,
Sure.
if it's this very dangerous to fall into that sort of a game, because by their fruits you shall know them. You know.
Right. Yeah, well, I don't like to try to because the reality is that I like, especially on TikTok and in real life, just in general, I encounter people of all different belief systems and backgrounds, and there are people who are atheists, there are people who are part of different religions, and I'm kind of at a place now where I accept and acknowledge that it's like everyone has to come to their own conclusions, and their thoughts and feelings are valid. And if I want someone to respect my, experience, then
Yeah.
I have to respect theirs.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
we're all participating in our own journey. And so, for some people, coming to certain conclusions is part of that journey. And so that's why, like, I don't necessarily get mad at somebody if they question me, because I feel like it is good to have a skeptical mindset. But at the same time, like, it's like you said, just because something happens in your head or in your heart doesn't mean that it's not real, because it made me feel better and it gave me immense comfort. And that was what I was struggling with at that point in time, was not feeling loved, not feeling at peace. And that gave me peace. And now I'm just like so excited for the potential to have another experience because I want to continue to have that peace that only something like that can provide,
Absolutely.
like
And that's where it happens, you know, that union with God. It's where you can't, you get to a point where you can't desire the physical nature of this world any longer. You have to just stay in his presence because
right.
this world is a mess, man. It really
Yes.
is. And having that comfort, that shalom, that wholeness in the midst of whatever you're going through. I saw someone the other day on TikTok who's, I suppose he's homeless or going through a really rough period of time, and he had nothing, but he's still out there praising God and telling thank you, next essentially to everybody who's being mean to him on the comment section. And he's using pretty good scripture to back it up, but people have been absolutely awful to him just because of his situation.
Yeah. And that's horrible. I mean, there's no, you just don't know what someone's gone through in their life,
Yeah.
like that's why I try not to judge people because, well, first off, I did that for many years of my life, like, I mean, judgment was just a part of my religion, like because people would, step out of line and then you couldn't talk to them. You couldn't associate with them anymore. And so that was just woven into my belief system. So it's taken a lot of work for me to undo that, and I'm still
Sure.
struggling with that, especially because, I am my own worst judge,
Have you been like per se like excommunicated from Jehovah's
I have
Witness or
not.
like sort of
I have not. Um, I have nothing official, let's just put it that way, but I would say that unofficially, yes.
I get that.
People are not really associating with me. And listen, that's fine. Like if you don't feel comfortable associating with me, whatever, like it's not gonna make me feel upset because I want to be around people who want to be around me. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like know your worth.
So
Know your worth. It's not, it's not you, it's the people that are around you at the moment.
right. And a lot of those
And
people
those
are
whole
just
situations,
participating in that because they are forced to.
and those
It's
situations
not
can make
really
people feel
something
like
they,
they're in a very real hell, on earth versus what church should be, a version of heaven on earth. You know what I mean? And I'm very sorry. I
yeah,
can only imagine something like that because my church didn't really do excommunication style things. They would
right.
just talk bad about you behind your back, which is just like
Which,
most
and that, and
evangelical
it's,
people,
that is a problem as well, I mean, and I experienced that as well. But that the shunning is probably definitely the worst aspect of
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witness theology because it just divides up families. Parents can't speak to their children, friends can't speak to each other. I mean, you know,
It makes love conditional,
oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know? Yeah,
absolutely.
it's the opposite of what it should be. It really
And
is.
if you can put your, religion above your love for your children, like I really do. I remember growing up hearing this, I'm always going to love Jehovah more than I'm going to love you. And the reality,
I grew up hearing the same sort of thing. My mom said once, she goes, if God ever told me to sacrifice you like he did Isaac to about, I think it was, yeah, Abraham and Isaac, she goes, I would. And I was like,
and
oh,
have you,
no
do you even
hesitation,
know,
like
that's rough. Well, and so for me, what my revelation was that God never forces you to pick and choose. Like he does not force you to have a hierarchy of love
right,
where
right.
you have to love me before you love your kids. You can love your kids 100% and you can still love God 100%.
I'd say
It's
you're
sort of like a
expected to.
jealous,
Yeah.
to me it's almost like it makes me think about, like you'll hear about these toxic abusive partners where they'll
Yeah.
say, well, you have to love me first.
Hmm.
Like, no, that's not how it works. Like you have the capacity to love your partner and also love your kids.
Hmm.
And like, so in a way, it's like God for them is like an abusive partner because
I think
he,
back to that verse, but yeah, I do think you're correct on that. It's like an abusive partner, like almost like a narcissist, because that's been their
sure,
view of him. but
Yeah,
trying to remember exactly where I was going with that. Right before
that's
that, what
fine.
did I say?
Um, well, we were talking about how God is kind of like a toxic and abusive. And from their perspective, it's
Yeah.
almost like he's an abusive partner because a lot of the tactics that a narcissistic, abusive a partner will use in a relationship is the things that they say that God is doing.
Oh, that's
Like,
where I was going with it is when he says, he says, I this is my commandment. I tell you to love one another. Then he says, and the second is like unto it, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So he's saying to love God is alike to loving your neighbor. You can't say, like in that situation, it's the exact opposite. It's like, oh, I can't say that I truly love my wife if I hate my kids.
mhm.
My wife, my kids are a part of both me and my wife in that instance. You know what I mean? And
And
that's
this is
yeah,
just another example of how a lot of Christian groups, churches, denominations, whatever, they take the Bible and they come to the worst conclusions based off of the message. Like it's like you were talking about your mother and how,
mhm,
Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. Well, in my then I come to find out in my deconstruction journey that that was actually a lot of Bible scholars, academic scholars, they believe that story was created by the priestly class as a way to educate the public, almost like a PSA, where it was like, please don't sacrifice your children.
yeah.
Because it was a problem at that time where people were sacrificing their children to
Molech
Jehovah
and to
because
gods
they
and
thought
stuff.
that's what Jehovah expected from them. So the
Yeah.
point of that
Jehovah was
story
like, I
was
hated child sacrifice, and they're over here burning some, like
ex-
doing some
and
awful stuff.
exactly, and that's something that other,
Mhm.
of course, Israel is like an offshoot of the Canaanites, and the
Yeah.
Canaanites participated in child sacrifice, although a lot of what we know about the Canaanites came through the Israelites, and they did not have a very good perception of the Canaanites. So it's
Yeah.
possible that they may have just said that just to demonize them.
Well, you can think
But
about it. The Exodus out of Egypt was the first thing that happened before the conquest of Canaan. So,
yeah,
as they're conquesting Canaan, God sets up all these rules and stipulations against the Canaanite gods, which were like the Egyptian ones that they had already set up idols to. Well,
sure.
then when Israel backslides and they go back to the Canaanite culture and the Canaanite gods, and they backslide often, off and on throughout the entire history of the Old Testament. Yahweh becomes conflated with Yahweh Baal from the
Hmm.
Canaanite religion, and it becomes one and the same. And he becomes um, the son of. I'm trying to think of he. He's the son in the pantheon. He's the son of the major father El
Sure.
and
Yeah.
Asherah. Yeah, and Asherah.
Right. So, and that's another huge kind of
Oh yeah, that's a
can of
huge topic.
worms because learning about the Ugaritic texts and seeing the similarities, because really that's a document that predates anything from the Bible. And
Yeah,
so you can see how there's an evolution happening. And for me, it's like you mentioned about their backsliding to the Canaanite. For me, it's like you really question who's really like the quote unquote good guy, like, or is there even a good guy in this scenario? Because
yeah,
those individuals, of course, from the Bible's perspective, our modern canon,
yeah.
were being demonized because of the fact they were participating in false worship.
Yeah.
But I'm sure from their perspective they were worshiping those gods for centuries without any problem.
Yeah, I'm sure
And
also
so
they looked at the Israelites like, oh, what are these gods doing? So
it's like there's always two sides to a pancake,
yeah, because
like
where the
so
Israelites were sacrificing, the same sort of thing that the foreign people were doing, that the pagan cultures were doing, to them, they're like, how are they any different at those periods of time? You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
extremely confusing, extremely
Right.
confusing.
And the reality is that they do believe, that there is evidence that Israelites did participate in sacrifice of children.
Yeah,
And like
sadly.
I'm not saying eventually I really do believe that they tried to clean up their act in that regard. And I think that's specifically why they had book stories like that one about Abraham and Isaac, because it was really just like I'm calling it an ancient PSA where it was like, please do not, please do not sacrifice your children. Yahweh does not expect you to do that for him, because at the end of the story, he says to him, nope, don't want you to do that. So, but what's crazy is that most Christian groups have the complete opposite interpretation of that, where they see that as almost a precursor to Jesus, in that, oh, well, look, God sacrificed his own son. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son. So you, as a parent, should be willing to basically
Do that.
even be willing to throw your child on the
And
sacrificial
they don't
altar.
understand what it was symbolizing. It's like every story in the Bible, any story in the Bible, if you take just that story out, it's like a little snippet, right? And you want to play it, you're going to go through the same parts of the exact same story. It's like a puzzle in
Mm-hmm.
every one of those Bible stories, and it is the gospel story. But if you know it, in that story, there's a ram that is provided right after, and it's
Yeah,
like that's the angry God for the sin of the world. The demiurge, the one who's mad at the flesh. He
right.
comes after, he's coming after the flesh, but there was a sacrifice provided that wasn't the child. And I think they miss that point so much with that story. They miss that point so much.
Yeah, well, and it's just crazy to me how, I mean, for me, it's almost like, and this is why I do kind of resonate with Gnosticism, is that it's almost like there's this false message that God wants he wants sacrifice, and yet the Bible says God wants mercy, not sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's this strong belief that God wants and demands sacrifice from his people. And I don't really believe that Jesus Christ was like I don't perceive him as, almost like, I don't like to see him as a sacrifice. Like,
Yeah,
I
I don't. I
understand
think
that that's
substitutional atonement is messy, and it paints God in a really bad, bloodthirsty
sure.
kind of light.
Yeah,
And I'm not
yeah.
saying every principle about substitutional atonement, because yes, he did take our place, but he didn't. It's not more or less that he came down with the idea to sacrifice himself to the old Abrahamic God. Because even Abraham sacrificing Isaac, Abraham wasn't God in that scenario. God was the one who
Mhm.
provided the ram. So if we get into all those stories, and we're looking at it that way, I don't I see it almost like, there's the accuser. The devil is the accuser of the brethren, right? And he's saying, "Oh, look at your sin. It's dirty, it's fleshly, it's rotten. You've done this, you've done that, you've done this." And you even have parallels to the Ten Commandments, more or less, in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, where they're like, "I did not fornicate, I did not have adultery, I did not eat this animal or eat that animal, I did not steal." And all of these things that they have to say in the afterlife is like a magic spell in their
Mhm.
belief to hopefully rectify their sin, to eliminate their sin. Well, then
Mhm.
there was someone who came to take the penalty for that sin, but not like he did it to appease a bloodthirsty God. More or less, he sacrificed himself to humanity.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
like humanity murdered him, more or
Well,
less.
and also
So,
maybe I think
yeah,
people take things a little bit too literally, because when they're connecting it to the idea of, I mean, it's not an unreasonable conclusion to draw that, you look at how in ancient Israel they would participate in performing a sacrifice ritual for God to atone for their sins. And so of course there's a parallel, and there's a connection. But that doesn't necessarily mean that God, or that, well, Jesus is God, but um that doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus is supposed to be a quote unquote sacrifice. I think he's representing something like a sacrifice, but that doesn't mean he literally is that. And the
Or like
reason why
portrayed.
I feel that there needs to be that distinction is because I do not believe that Jesus' purpose when he was on this planet was to just die.
Yeah.
I think he knew he was going to die. I
Yeah.
think that because I think he knew he was an enemy of a lot of people. A lot of
Right.
people wanted him dead,
Right. Yeah.
but I don't think that he just came to the earth so that he could die. But
Other than just the divine knowing of what was going to happen, it's hard to almost put into words, but I know exactly what you're saying. It's like his purpose was not to become a sacrifice, but to end up becoming a sacrifice in that sense. Not like he had to die, but he did it for that very love that the church lacks today.
and there's like it's like there's parallels. Like it's like you brought up earlier about the fact that there's often a connection made between Jesus the Son and also the literal Son.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say, well, are you actually saying that Jesus actually is the Son? No. I'm just saying that there's a parallel. And
Right.
so, in a beautiful way, we're connecting the
Symbolism.
two because, like, I mean, people will act like that's almost like a horrible thing. But I think to myself, the Bible, I know that there's a scripture in the Bible where Jesus' kingdom is likened to the moon
Right.
because the moon is eternal. And so, Jesus' kingdom is symbolized by the moon because it's eternal. It's always going to be up there in the sky. Does that mean that Jesus' kingdom is a literal moon? No, it's just a symbol. It's just we communicate through symbols and we communicate through allegory because the message, if it were to be sent in, like, we have to, it has to be filtered into our brains and it has to
Just
be
like how
processed in a
Jesus
way that we can
spoke in
understand,
parables.
you know? So he's got to use the language that we understand. So, in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, I feel like Christianity has taken that way too literally, where it's like, oh, well, it says, you know, I know that there's scriptures that talk about Jesus being connected to the sacrifice, but I feel like that was really just meant to be a symbolic connection and not necessarily a literal one.
Mhm.
And also, I'm going to go so far as to say that people after Jesus died were really disappointed. And I think that they wanted to kind of make that kosher in a way. Like the fact that Jesus was killed, oh, well, he had to die. Like, because they had to kind of make it a good thing, you know, like, oh, well, he had to die because that was fulfilling prophecy. And in a way, I feel like that was soothing their own ego because they didn't want to accept the fact that
That they killed him. Yeah.
exactly that the
That's how it
Messiah
is.
was killed and
Yeah.
you know, like I don't know. Maybe I just think there's many reasons for why we have the current theology that we have for Jesus. You know, like I
I think it
think
gets
that
messy too because they're trying to convey what God knew as a man when he was walking in the flesh, and then you're also getting into deep philosophic ideas about prophecy, like what even is prophecy? Is there predestination? Is it free will? Is it destiny until free will? Is it choices that lead individually to different destinies, so free
sure.
will that leads to destinies? What exactly is going on? Because that more or less is that conversation.
Hmm.
And I suppose you could probably get a pretty good understanding from studying and researching those and cross-checking them with each other. Um, but that's actually really fascinating. I would like to know about that. Yeah. So I always like finding cool little spiritual slash scientific things to add into the ministry. It adds a different kind of esoteric, almost new age type perspective to look at
Hmm.
things with, but it's good and it's concrete. So
Yes.
yeah.
And you know, I just think that there's many ways of drawing conclusions, and I think that oh, one of the things that I did want to mention was the fact that you know when Jesus was alive, you know, on the earth, he didn't ask anyone to write anything down. And I think that
Right.
that's really significant because all of the writings that we have about Jesus were written well after he had already died.
Mhm.
So the stories that we've received about Jesus are like, were probably originally oral stories told amongst his followers, and then eventually someone had the common sense to write something down.
Yeah.
But I don't think that
I do
people
like to
really
think some of
they
them,
don't
like
really
Matthew, was
reflect on,
yeah.
why did he do that? Why did he not write anything down? Why did he not tell anybody to write anything down? And my
He just thought he was that
download
important. Yeah.
was that because you talked about how you've experienced some downloads. For
Sure.
me, it's like I had that physical, spiritual, visible astral projection. But another thing that I experienced was a thought coming into my brain that was just inserted into my brain.
Yeah, they're
Like it
like
just
intrusive thoughts, but when they're from God, they're
it
almost
was a
like
very
just know.
commanding.
It's like electric
Yeah.
or something.
It was not a thought that I had generated. I knew it was like bam. It was almost like, you said that you
It's
heard
like
the
it has some
trumpets.
authority with it.
I
Yeah.
heard this in my head, and it was like with authority, and it was commanding, and it was saying everything has already been fulfilled. So, in other words, all of the prophecies that Christianity loves to point to being at some future time have already been accomplished. And that was why I kept wondering. It's like I kept having this thought, and it's almost like God answered authoritatively because I kept thinking to myself, isn't that funny that like why are all these stories about Jesus written after he died?
Yeah.
Like, why didn't he do that himself? I'm sure he could write. I'm sure he had
Yeah, I'm
friends
sure
who
he
could
had an
write.
autobiography he could have
You
made or
know,
something. Yeah. So I
so
get what you're saying.
that was the resounding message is like, listen, the people he was talking to in that message was specifically meant for that generation of people.
And those people.
And those were the people that were kind of the elect. And those were the people that were going to go up into heaven, and I'm not, so then you would probably wonder yourself, where does that leave us? Because
Yeah.
if everything's been accomplished and those people have already gone up to heaven, then where are we? And that's why I firmly believe that we are in a different spot in the timeline than what we've been led to believe by most Christian groups. They still want us to believe that we're in expectation of some sort of Armageddon event and that there's going to be some sort of rapture or something like that.
And
I think that
there's
that's already
always
happened.
yeah, and there's like underlying fear and oppression that comes with that
Sure, sure.
mentality.
And
I've
it's keeping
studied that
people in
for a long
expectation, like the fact
and
that
it's a
people
good
are supposed to
distraction
be.
too, because even if we're actual children of God, we don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. We'll be provided for. Our only main focus should be helping as many people as we can during through it, if this is what's taking place. Which I mean, I understand how the Bible can be like a fractal, how it could be completed in one sense and then still being completed in another one. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
infinite coming out. But I do agree with most of what you said, where the prophecies have been fulfilled. I've read a little bit into preterism and
Yeah.
how revelation's already occurred. I do believe revelation was an allegory. I think it could also have quite a bit to do with the current situation of the world, as it always does, because
Sure.
history repeats. We got about a 88-year timer or so where history just wants to cycle upon itself and the same thing happens over and over again. That those points during time are very very important because they also tell the gospel story. You can think about how a caterpillar dies to be reborn as a butterfly, or
Hmm.
um, a water droplet dies to be reborn as a snowflake. Literally everything, any alive cell on my body dies and is being replaced. The dead skin falls off, the live skin keeps
Yes.
coming back. That's death and resurrection, death and
Yep.
rebirth, the lotus flower, all of it. And
Hmm.
it's all the gospel story. It's very it's very mystical, but that's that logos, that's that logos they were speaking about, that
Hmm.
has that deep mystical value to it. And then the Dharma, the unspoken word of creation.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's so true. Like, and that's why, like, what what you brought up earlier about the fact that like there's lots of things in this world and in nature that for you have demonstrated that there is something going on here, that there's more to this picture than we realize. For me, it was you see the sun and you see the moon in the sky, and they are, from our perspective, are the exact same size in the sky.
Mm.
Now that didn't have to be that way. The sun could be bigger than the moon. The moon could have been, bigger than the sun from our perspective.
For sure.
Why of all it don't, and then of course not only are they the same size, but they overlap,
Mm.
and form an eclipse. And I mean, just that fact alone to me demonstrates that we were not placed here randomly.
Right.
Because to me that's a little clue, like that's a little Easter egg that, like, hey, just to let you know, your placement here is deliberate, because there's little things that you can see in nature that demonstrate that. It's like I believe in the idea of intentional placement. I don't believe that I do believe in evolutionary processes, but I also believe that our placement on this earth is deliberate. And
Right. It
I
can't be
believe that
nature.
there's something special and unique. And, there's, of course, morbid people who think that this is all some sort of weird science experiment, or, you can have the total opposite where people think that things are, you have all types of perspectives on why we've been placed here.
Mhm.
But, I just think that there's no denying that our placement is intentional.
For sure.
That, I guess maybe that's what the Bible was talking about when it said that to deny the existence of God or something is inexcusable. Maybe what that's referring to is just the fact that you can just see so many things, and it's just, to me, it all demonstrates that there's
Somebody holding it together.
something. It's like there's a programmer. It's like
Yeah.
we're living in that simulation, and it's like in a game, like a video game, like they'll put little Easter eggs and things for you to, that are just little things to appreciate. And it's like, I think that that's something that, it's like they have a sense of humor.
Right. 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 And going back to the sun and the moon being the same size, you can notice that the sun is always glorified, and that the moon is dead to its old self, and that it's reflecting the sun's light, or it's absorbing the sun's light to reflect it. That's what dielectric is, a dielectric. And that's getting more into syncretism, but if I haven't covered that already on my YouTube channel, I will end up covering it. But if you've ever seen the sun and moon during the solar eclipse, where you don't see either of them, but the glory of which outshines the both of them. And
Right.
if you
The
look at
sun.
that glory, that corona cloud, it looks like an eye. There's a
Hmm.
reason for that eye, and it's about the wedding, the alchemical marriage, the union, the fusion between you and God.
Sure. Yeah. And
It's
I
quite
mean,
incredible.
yeah, I'm sure people looked up in the sky when they saw that, like you think about early humans, how that must have that experience of seeing something like that, they would have recognized that something significant and spiritual was happening. Because that's so, I mean, it's so profound. It's so profound that we get to have that experience. And I don't know, I just don't know how anyone can see that and not at least have the thought cross their mind of, wow, isn't that an odd coincidence?
Yeah,
Like,
or
I
some kind
mean,
of, that's almost like it's designed or something, huh?
it, it's almost like that was a little Easter egg or something. Because,
Mhm.
it's like there's so many references to the sun and moon in the Bible. There are luminaries, and they're a constant companion.
Heavenly
And,
hosts. Yeah.
it's like many Christian groups, they'll say, well, that's just pagan, and it's like, no, it's a beautiful reminder of the connection that exists between, all things. Everything is connected. And whether it's the sun or the moon or things in nature, sacred geometry, it all to me connects back to that idea that there is something going on here.
Absolutely.
And I don't have all the answers. I never will, but I'm definitely open to the idea that there is something significant and profound out there.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
If you seek, you'll
so
find, by the way, too. Like, I know, I mean, you for, in comparison, we're probably about the same age, but regardless, we're both into these kind of mysteries and this knowledge very, very young. We've got a head start on our generation, so to speak. We're
mhm,
into this stuff. And
right.
yeah, and it's only untelling where God's going to lead us from here. I read in the book of Enoch yesterday, on one of my TikTok videos about how the Watchers and their wisdom, their mysteries of heaven that they took and gave to the women they slept with, and that they spread it all across the earth as magic and fertility cults and different things. And it said in the book of Enoch there, it said that the mysteries they knew were worthless ones, that they weren't actual worthwhile mysteries. And I'm like, well, if those mysteries that I've even had to work out and look through from a Christian perspective, if those are worthless, I can't even imagine the things that God could have in store for us in for the rest of this life and even in the next life. It's
Sure.
almost unfathomable. It's
Right.
a
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Chris Tomlin, I can't even imagine, but
I mean, there you
that's what
go.
I'll say. Yeah, but it's awesome for sure.
Yeah. And, one of the things, just going back to the idea of the timeline, is that I don't really, it's like the Bible is kind of the end note of the Bible is this revelation, which is this apocalyptic message. And I just wondered to myself, was that intentional? So that people, when it's like you remember the last thing you read, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so to end the Bible on that kind of an apocalyptic note, it's a real Debbie Downer in a way, because it feels like, well, is that how things are just going to end up? That God's going to just it's going to be a Noah's Ark 2.0
Yeah,
where the whole
people have
earth
some
is going to
things
be
from the
bathed in
Revelation.
fire, and
Yeah,
we're going to have this worldwide destruction. And I don't really put a ton of stock into Revelation, but I'm not going to discredit it completely.
absolutely.
But for me, I really do believe that we are in a different place in the timeline, and I do believe that we are living in the millennial reign, and that what we're going through right now is that, 1,000 years of spiritual enlightenment and elevation,
Hmm.
and what you're experiencing, what I'm experiencing, what so many people are experiencing, it's like they've been saying we're entering into that age of Aquarius. And whether or not you believe in astrology, it's like I said, everything's connected.
Right.
And I
The age
think
of
it's awfully
Aquarius.
interesting that we're lining up, you know?
The age of
It,
Aquarius is the pouring out of knowledge,
sure.
but every sign also has a dualistic portion to it, so it's also the pouring out of wrath on the wicked. But
Hmm.
what's important to note is that the name revelation, it means an unveiling, a revealing, a
Sure.
revelation, right? So you're seeing something as real for the first time when you didn't see it as real. And there's a lot of people, even in this day, who are ran by their egos, who work even from a Christian perspective for the material world. You can see pastors who have private jets, private planes, gold toilet seats, and
Sure.
not doing a thing for the poor. That's precisely what I'm talking about, and the spiritual community is talking about on this. And it's like a false sense of spirituality, and that really is where all false spirituality comes from, is that ego. When someone can truly be
Hmm.
egoless, and be a complete vessel for the Holy Spirit, that's when that real, like, immense realization occurs, and gnosis, as I've talked about.
Yes. And, if I could just connect it to another like parable, because I don't think that people really give enough thought to the parables. The whole idea, I know there's like a passage where it talks about how, someone, it's like someone will be at the threshing floor and one person will stay and the other person will walk away. And, it's like they go in all these different places. One person will be out in the field, the other person will walk away. And it's like, why are those people leaving the picture? And the reason why is because they've gotten the message. So they've been enlightened. And so they're now departing the scene
Mm-hmm.
because they've gotten the message. They've been enlightened. And so they're all leaving so that they can meet up with each other.
The new world,
So
right? Yeah.
it's like it's really is what it's talking about with the wheat and the weeds, where time has
And it's
been
age.
allowed to for these things to grow, and there's now going to be a separation happening where there's going to be a divergence where people that are getting the message are going to go one way, and then people who don't get the message are going to go another way. And so that to me is what we're experiencing right now, is that there's people who are going to kind of take a stage left, take an exit, and then there's going to be people who go another way. And I'm not necessarily saying that one's off to destruction and one's to enlightenment, but I think that it's like I think that people are being specifically selected,
Yeah.
because maybe of their experiences or their mindset. They're the people that Source can use to be able to spread his message and to be able to actually heal the world.
For sure. So, yeah, just speaking about back again with Revelation, yeah, I really do think it's going to be that awakening of the individual in the asleep collective. That's really what it's talking about. And as you wake up, there is going to be tribulation. There's people who are going to persecute you, do all kinds of things. And you can look at the book of Revelation allegorically and still get the same understanding of it as you can, thinking about it literally, probably with, the least amount of uh how would I put it? Like almost PTSD like symptoms where you're worried that something's going to be taking place and that it's taking the joy away from your life. You can still get the
It
same
keeps
message
people
out
in
of
a
it.
low state of
Yeah.
consciousness
Low
because they're
vibration.
afraid. Like they're afraid that they're going to be destroyed and that they're going to be damned forever in hell. And I just think when you're that afraid, it's like you're so much more easily to be able to be manipulated.
And to
Like,
just reject things too immediately. You know what I
sure,
mean? Like if you think, oh, God's gonna do this to me, but he claims to be a loving God, well, I'm gonna be impulsive and denounce him, or say some horrible things, or be against him for a while. And I experienced going down that path for a long time, and that was quite a bit of
hmm,
what sort of brought that on was just religious trauma and a bad idea of
sure,
nature and who he is.
right. It's like religion. It's really supposed to help people out, but in for a lot of people, it actually drags them down, and it makes them depressed, and it makes them feel, because
Makes them
it's like there's
dogmatic.
so much toxicity because it's like, oh, well, you're a sinner and you're born a sinner and you're good for nothing, dust to dust. And if it wasn't for Jesus, you'd be dust to dust. And I just think like that's a really toxic and negative perspective. Like, I believe almost the complete opposite, where I'm like, we
Yeah.
all have the divine spark inside of us,
We're made in the image of
and
God. Yeah. Like,
like very, very contrary to this idea that we are. It really goes all the way back to the deception about the falling in the Garden of Eden. In my opinion, this whole idea that Adam and Eve are like a representation of fallen humanity and how we have fallen, and we are just in this bad space, bad place. I just think I don't think that that's what the ancient Jewish people believed, because I think that they actually came to the conclusion that it's just inside people's human nature to be disobedient. Like there's always going to be that chaotic serpent within their heart that's
Mhm.
going to direct them to eat the fruit.
Yeah.
Because it's like when you have free will, the choice to disobey is always going to be an option, you know? So that chaotic serpent, because to me, that serpent that's present in the Garden of Eden is representative of the primordial chaos that existed prior to the demiurge separating the waters, you know, bringing forth order from disorder.
Right.
But you can't completely get rid of chaos because how can you have free will and not have some chaos on some level? You know,
Right. So
it's
then we
like,
get into the polarity and like how electricity is, it's a two-sex hybrid energy. It has a positive and a negative, if you would, in
sure.
that. And so that's a good and an evil. That's the serpent from the garden. It comes in a sine wave, and the
Mm-hmm.
etymology of the word sine is sin. So we have a mathematical equation that we can graph for what sin is, and we can put that on a graph and show people like, okay, this is, it's deviating from God's will, and it's a serpent. And it's like, how
Oh,
interesting is that?
the serpent, like I would love, I feel like you could do so much just research on the serpent symbol, and especially the serpent and the staff,
Yeah,
because I
rod of
mean, you
Damascus.
have that present in the Garden of Eden story.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have that present with Moses when he puts up the bronze serpent in the
Brazen serpent. Yeah.
wilderness. And then, of course, we have that directly connecting to Jesus. And in many depictions of Jesus on the cross, there's a snake present
Mhm.
at the
Even the
foot of the
caduceus.
cross
Yeah,
because
even
there, once again, it's that there's a connection. And then outside of the Bible, you have the what is it, the rod of Ecliptus or whatever, and the caduceus. You
the
know, like
caduceus. Yeah.
I mean, the caduceus is a cross-like symbol. I mean, it's it's right there in your face. And of course, the word seraphim itself means winged serpent, you know, because they saw these as divine beings, and serpents were associated with divinity because if you could control a serpent, that there's like an instinctual fear of snakes because
Right.
they are poisonous and they are dangerous. So if
Sudden
a
death.
if an
Yeah.
entity can
Polarity.
control snakes,
Yeah.
they have all the power because a snake can't be controlled, it can't be tamed,
Mhm.
you know, like good luck.
You can think
But
about
that's
the
not an issue
story where
for a
the
god,
yeah,
you
where
know.
like the Egyptian sorcerers sent out serpents against Moses and his people, and then Moses did the same thing with his staff. It was like, serpents were very scary to the people back then.
Sure.
Very scary in
Right.
mythology.
And you know, like if you look at depictions of Ashura, she is often shown holding serpents in her hands. Like, you know, she's the tree, and then you'll see she's holding these serpents in her hands. And the reason that she's holding these serpents is because that's what gods did. They could control serpents, and you know they could send out serpents, of course, to
You can
hurt
think of the New
people.
Testament verse, "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." That's
Sure.
Jesus speaking. He's saying that.
So I
So
don't necessarily see the serpent as a negative symbol. I feel like
yeah, it's
many
not.
Christian religions have turned the serpent in the Garden of Eden. They just say, well, that's just Satan. And that's one interpretation. But I feel like they retroactively put that onto that story
It was just
because,
lazy. It's lazy because I don't want to go through all the, oh, cursed is a man who's hung on a tree. Oh, that was symbolic of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So was the cross. So was the solar analemma. So was all these other things. But they don't want to go into all that and let these people know. So they're just going to slap a label on it to keep people from looking into it. And I think
it's
that's
like almost like religion on training wheels. Like,
yeah.
in a way, I almost feel like I really,
I guess
I really
nobody's
do
done this
believe
before
that
unless
there
they
are
have.
certain people that have more understanding of certain things. Like, this is going to be very conspiratorial, but I almost really believe that, like, the Catholic Church, there are people that are very educated. I mean, they've had centuries to do research. and they have their own libraries. You know, they have access to so much information that the general public does not have access to.
Mhm.
And I firmly believe that they know way more. And it's like they deliberately put out it's like baby food
Oh yeah,
because that's what they think you deserve. You just because that's all they think you can comprehend.
really, yeah, because really religion is just mass marketed mysticism, because
Sure.
mysticism is, a value of one's individual relationship with God. So if they're mass marketing out mysticism, and instead of giving people meat that they need to eat, they're giving them little milk chunks, and then they're going
Mm-hmm.
off more dogma that they've created than what's actually in the Bible, you have on your hands another Pharisee cult.
Sure.
The exact same situation as Matthew 28. And oftentimes, when I come across people who are that hard set evangelical, I will just point them to Matthew 28. I'm like, read Matthew 28, get your priorities in straight, because it, they were proselytizing, they were going over land and sea, they were telling people they were wrong and they need to convert. But Jesus said they were doing it wrong. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very important to find out what they were doing wrong, why they were doing it wrong, and to keep from doing that again. Because I feel like most of modern Christianity seems to ignore passages like Matthew 28. And if they
Mm-hmm.
if they didn't, they would be held accountable. And
Right.
we
Yeah.
see it
Oh,
we see it
well,
there.
I don't know how it's like, I don't know how you can selectively ignore the fact that Jesus spent most of his time denouncing legalism, and yet that's exactly what Christianity has become. You know, it's I mean, I shouldn't say all of Christianity, but for many Christian groups, legalism is a big thing. You know, it's just a bunch of
It's a huge
rules to
problem, because
follow.
it's gotten to the point where we can't take a single denomination or any few denominations and be like, okay, yeah, these guys got it right and everyone else has it wrong. You just, at this point, it's gotten to such a conglomerated, you know cluster of a mess that we just can't really dig through like I said, there's 40,000 different denominations of Christianity all across the entire world. I think there's at least a few hundred of those that are within the United States alone. And Jesus said a house divided can't stand. Well,
Mhm.
divide and conquer. There's only one more step left to do with us at this point, it seems like, and it's kind of embarrassing. We've just let it happen. And
Right. Yeah.
yeah, it's that spirit of
So
separation. We're letting it win. We're letting it win. We're letting it win until it gets a whole lot of ground, and then we're in the situation, where
that's
thousands
why
of
I
people.
feel like this time is significant
Yeah.
because, it's like time has been allowed to pass for the wheat to be distinguished from the weeds because the whole point of that
The
parable
wheat
was
for
that
tares. Yeah.
you can't know until that you've reached that stage of maturation.
Mhm.
Up to that point, the wheat and the weed are identical. You
Yeah, they
cannot
look just
tell the
alike.
difference between the wheat and the weed. You have to wait. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's what we've experienced is we've seen historically how that's played out. We've seen, churches come and go, we've seen them develop, and we've seen I think at this stage it's very clear how you can identify what's a wheat and what's a weed
Right. It's like
because
that. It's like that verse. The good will become evil, and the evil will become good. It's like it was talking about something hugely metaphysical,
right.
and that what we're witnessing is, you know, a test of discernment. Is bad fruit coming from good trees? Is good fruit coming from bad trees? When he said it doesn't do that, we can
Yes.
look around in reality and see it doesn't do that. So
Yeah. And like it talks about how, you'll know them by the fruits. And it's like, okay, centuries have passed. Christianity has pretty much gone dominated. I mean, it's dominated. It was the state religion of Rome, so it's had
yeah.
its opportunity, you know what I mean? And so it's been in a dominant position for centuries. And what is the end result? Can you look around and see that the Christian churches of the world have really enlightened people? Have they
Yeah,
brought
because
happiness to
the whole one
people?
of the whole things I want to point out is that Protestants, like at least in the broad spectrum of Protestants, people who aren't Catholic but still Christian, any of those denominations are still using a mostly Catholic canon.
Oh, yeah.
they're
Right.
still, they're still renouncing the books that the Catholic Church renounces, and they're still calling heresy to the things the Catholic Church calls us heresy to, and they're not going to look into it. They're just going to believe
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge.
Right.
That's simple.
But and I think at the end of the day we can see the fruits, and the fruits are a lot of hurt people, a lot of trauma, a lot of physical violence, death,
Sexual
and of course
violence.
we see all this child abuse that's going on in all of these different religions, no exception from, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just one example out of many of religious institutions that are covering up child abuse. The Catholic Church has been doing it for who God knows how long. I mean,
Right.
probably centuries, but
They just
it's
move them around too. They don't even get rid of them.
right. Yeah, and I'm glad it's getting brought to light, but it's like once again, that's an example of the fruit. It's like when you have dirty hands, everything you touch is gonna have dirt on it.
Exactly.
And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's like these groups have dirt on their hands that no amount of washing is ever going to wash off.
Hmm.
And so it's like it's really we really are at a stage now where we're seeing that wheat forming because they can't even conceal it anymore.
Yeah.
For many years they could conceal it because they had relationships with governments and they were able to keep things hush hush. But now that religion is not as dominant and there isn't this kind of bedfellow relationship between Christianity and a lot of governments, they are getting exposed
Yeah.
for their dirty deeds. And people, it's coming to light now because I think people would be shocked and ashamed if they knew just how pervasive something like child abuse is in Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's horrible.
Just to
But it's
touch on
like,
the Catholic indigenous schools, because they
oh
didn't get very
yes.
much media coverage at all. There was thousands of skeletal remains of very young children found underneath these schools that were Catholic owned schools for indigenous people, Native Americans. And these
Right.
children were tortured, like Inquisition style tortured, like evidence of rape, uh, beatings, everything like that. I mean, it's, you can go look it up yourself. I'm sure most of it is, I wouldn't say most of it, but a good bit of it would be hidden, so you might have to do your own digging, but
Hmm.
it'll pop up the second you're going to look up something like that, so you'll get at least some part of the story. But
And
very sad.
people say to themselves, or they wonder, like, how can these religious institutions, how can they support all of this injustice, But actually, see, you can twist anything to support your worldview. So the Bible is no exception. So if you want to find passages in the Bible where people are treated as lessers, you can find that, because all you have to do is look at there's plenty of passages in the Old Testament where entire groups of people are just written off as good for nothing. And, of course, you've probably heard about the curse of Ham and how, that was used to justify the treatment of black people
Yeah.
because, oh, they were descendants of Ham and God cursed Ham and Canaan. And,
Yeah.
meanwhile, the whole reason that story even existed was because Israel just despised Canaan and they made it part of their theology
Yeah.
that Canaan was a descendant of a molester. He molested his father.
There's
It's
people
like,
that think Ham um either molested his father, which some people won't even tolerate the idea of that because of, the patriarch he was. And but then in Leviticus it says to uncover a man's nakedness means to, see his woman's, or his woman partner. So it's also possible that he did something to know his wife, and other
right.
stuff like that etymologically in the text. And I haven't studied horribly deep into that. I'm just adding what I know.
No, no, I've heard that too. And I
Yeah.
think that it's ambiguous and I don't think that we know exactly, but
Yeah, he
I
just
don't
did something.
just did something.
Even the
It was
fact that
something
him
bad,
taking,
and it was
yes,
something that they could then use as a justification
to
for
separate
othering
somebody,
and
to
hating a
identify
group of
somebody
people.
with that, and then say, oh, we don't like them because of that. Because
because literally all
I don't
those
even know where the
centuries
evidence
ago,
would be that Ham was black in that regard. You know what I mean? And the rest of them were white. I don't know where they got that. You know?
right, right. Well, that's what a lot of groups they suggest that, Ham's sons, there was, I think, three, he had three sons, and that each son became a race of people or something, and I think that's just all extra biblical stuff
Yeah.
that's been
It's fine and
used.
dandy if you want to believe it, but let's not uncover that that rabbit
Right.
hole type thing. You
I
know?
mean, it's true. All races, I mean, we all are one family, so
Yeah.
everything does converge at some point. But I think that's, to me, that's just so silly,
Yeah, like to do it like
But
that is just yeah, because again, love is fair, and God's not gonna be like, okay, these people of this color can get salvation and these people can't, or anything like that's so
right.
unfair. That's the
And that's
opposite of what
exactly
love
what
is.
they believed.
Yeah,
They really believed that certain peoples, I mean, it's crazy to look back on, but really not that long ago, people believed that people of different races, like black people or Asian people, or anyone that was brown, basically, was not just a different person, but a lesser person.
yeah,
And that they, by their very nature, by the color of their skin, they were just nasty people, wicked people. And they could go into the Bible and find things like the curse of Ham and, the way that the Israelites talked about the Canaanites. They could use all of that as little feathers in their cap to support their ideology, because they could say, well, look, these people, the Bible said they were good for nothing because, I mean, how absurd to come to the conclusion that an entire group of people, an entire nation of people were evil because of the actions of one person.
right.
So that means I thought that
It kind of
God
reminds
said,
me, of the idea of the leprosy or something, but not in the instance of like actual skin or something, but just that they were different because they had leprosy, and it's almost like that was associated with uncleanness. Even
mhm,
though some forms of leprosy, like there are certain skin conditions today that would have been considered leprosy back then that aren't contagious, that aren't really unclean. There's plaque psoriasis and different things like that. So when you're looking at it, and Jesus came up and he healed the leper, when nobody's going to get close to him, nobody's going to come and touch him.
right.
It's, I guess it is sort of a demonization of how that individual is. But in that situation, just know that you're not being left. If the church leaves you, you're not being left. You're going to be found just like that leper was found, with the Spirit of God. So
Hmm.
just because they've outcasted you because of their view, that's not your problem. Your problem is your relationship. So
Right, and no one can
yeah,
take that away from you,
right, yeah,
because a lot of these institutions try to gaslight you into believing that in order for you to have a relationship with Jesus, you have to work through them. Like you have to go through their channels in order
yeah.
to have a
That's
direct
the funny thing. He don't
relationship
have a
with.
middleman, guys. He don't
Right,
have a
no.
middleman. There ain't no middleman.
I mean, I think that's what Jesus was supposed to be. I
Yeah,
think Jesus
exactly.
is more than capable of having a personal relationship
Yeah,
with every person on this planet. He doesn't need, you know, I think that he uses people. Of course, I think he uses people, but I don't think that he needs to have, like, it's such a human way of thinking, like that he needs a leader,
mhm,
like to be on earth. He needs a human leader to lead his people. I guess maybe part of that is the whole Moses thing, because I mean, there are patriarchs in the Bible, but I think that Jesus' presence brought an end to that kind of a system.
yeah,
I don't think that we need human leaders. I think
yeah.
that Jesus is more than capable of directing us, and
Right.
to
He was the
suggest
example.
otherwise, I think is to show a lack of faith in his power,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
do too. I do too. Yeah. But then you get people who aren't religious and they're terrified of the idea of like a theocracy and stuff like that. So I mean I understand how language like that could be terrifying to people who don't actually know who God is. But regardless, I think the ending story in the Bible is a theocratic society in the new world under Yeshua, but this isn't, we're not talking about Christian nationalism here. I want to make a very clear difference. This is
Mm.
godly rulership with God on earth. Okay. So
Yeah,
yeah, this is
I agree. And I think that, you know, well, Jesus said that that God's kingdom is in your heart. It's not, I mean, there's a lot of people that believe that there's going to be some, either that Jesus is going to use like an actual government like the United States, or that, Israel's going to fall out of the sky, I don't believe it's that literal of a thing. I think that the kingdom already exists first off, and it
okay.
exists in your heart. And I think that as a collective, as we continue to become enlightened and awakened, I
We
think
all
that
will
kingdom
move
is
there.
just going to form organically from
Yeah,
our actions.
absolutely.
It's not going to be like, I mean, some people literally believe that Israel's going to fall out of the sky, and land,
Right.
and then it's going to like fall on top of all. And it's just like, really? Like that, come on now.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
There's so many absurd theories. I mean, I don't know if you did the Baptists, did you guys get involved in that Left Behind stuff?
Oh yeah,
Like,
big time.
oh
Big time,
yeah,
big time. That's part of what happened with the rapture anxiety and stuff. It's because of those movies.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they started off as a book series and then they got adapted into Christian films, but I was not exposed to any of that because as you know, Jehovah's Witnesses do not have anything to do with any other Christian group. So we were not allowed to watch anything, any kind of other Christian material, like, any kind of Christian television or movies that would have been just seen as just as bad as anything else.
Yeah.
So because they would have seen that as propaganda, a propaganda tool for those religions. And so they couldn't have that because they can only be the propaganda tool.
Right, right. I get that.
So any contrary propaganda was not going to go. So
I saw something about Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were saying just if they actually checked the facts, they would find out that we are right, but they don't check the facts. But they don't check the facts. You know what I mean? If you check the facts, it's not correct, but they're just gonna sit there and gaslight the people who are following them to the point that you know what I
yes,
mean? It's like blatant lies to them.
well,
It's
that's,
awful.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like they, it's when you become, when you leave that group and you see some of the things that the
Mm.
leadership is saying, it's almost comical because it's like they're saying the exact opposite of what they're doing. Like
Yeah.
they say, oh, this is a spiritual paradise. This is God's loving organization. Meanwhile, you are covering up child abuse, and also they will tell their members, like, let's say something bad happened, like, someone got abused and it was by another Jehovah's Witness. A lot of people have been told, well, just leave it in God's hands. Like, don't take this person to jail or anything. But you don't think that the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses doesn't take people to court? Because there's been lots of instances when governments have threatened to take away their religious registration status because of shunning, and they spend a lot of money on court
Oh
lawyers.
yeah, I'm sure.
So it's kind of like a
Basically a
rules for thee,
corporation.
not for me kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Like at the top, they are doing everything in their power to keep their control, but they expect you to just leave it in God's hands. I would love to just say to the leadership, well, why don't you just leave it in God's hands? If you believe that you are being directed by God,
Yeah.
then why don't you just let him handle it? Why do
Why do
you
you need
need to
all
have
this money
lawyers
for?
and all
Yeah,
of this
exactly.
stuff? Like, I mean, that's using human institutions. Like, aren't you supposed to believe that God and his institutions are better?
Right.
So, I'm sure that they find some BS reason to.
I'm sure there is too. Yeah. and they end up being spiritually deficient because of what they push away and who they hurt and how they cover it up and how they
They're high on their own supply. Like a lot, there's a whole debate on does the governing body, which is the name of the leadership, does the governing body believe in what they say? Like, are they like they're totally high on their own supply. Like they
because there's
100%
no
drink
way,
their own
when you hear the
Kool-Aid.
stuff that they're
Because some
actually
cult leaders really truly are like they are aware that they are the Wizard of Oz. They are the man behind the curtain. These people are not aware of that. They 100% drink their own Kool-Aid. Like they're just
oh
as
my
much victims
goodness.
of cult indoctrination as the
Yeah,
people um that they talk to. Like they are
absolutely.
their own recipients of the indoctrination,
Mhm.
because they believe that they've been specifically chosen by God to direct his people. And I mean, most of the stuff that comes out of their mouths when you listen to them, there's no scriptures that are even coming out of their mouth. It's just
It's just
opinions.
dogma. Dogma has
Right,
been repeated and memorized and repeated over and over again.
right.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to jump back to the Left Behind book series
Oh,
because,
for sure.
like I said, I didn't grow up on that at all. I didn't grow up on the books or the movies or anything. Like, I was not exposed to any of that. And Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in the rapture, so that would have been like a big no-no. But I ended up doing a little bit of research, and I come to find out that the plot is that I guess the United Nations is going to somehow play a role in the like that's somehow connected to the Antichrist,
Hmm.
and that basically the United Nations is going to be used um, for some sort of like satanic agenda. That's kind of what the message is. I haven't read the book, but I heard that that was a plot detail, and then that is literally what Jehovah's Witnesses believe.
Really,
that is that
man.
is that is part of the theology of Jehovah's Witnesses
I
is
do think
they
it's possible that that could happen, but I also think there's a lot of good that would come from that very same thing as well. So like
right.
just like
I
with
just
everything in this, you get a little half good, half evil. We're living on the knowledge of good and evil, according to Genesis, according to the
sure.
tree. So
Right, and I'm not here to like to either condone or villainize the UN, but like
right.
for me, what was really mind blowing was that growing up, I thought that that was something that was unique and exclusive to just Jehovah's Witnesses. Like I thought that they had some special enlightenment that they had exposed, because they call it the Scarlet Beast in Revelation. That there's this Scarlet Beast. They believe that that's what is being represented by the United Nations, and um, of course, not that long ago, the United Nations put a South American statue of a multi-headed tiger in front of their building. And of course, a lot
Yes.
of Jehovah's
Yeah.
Witnesses went crazy over that because it
Oh my
looks
goodness.
sort of like a beast. But there's nothing unique about about that conclusion. There are lots of Christian groups that believe that the United Nations is somehow part of some sort of satanic agenda, and here I am thinking that that was some special enlightenment that Jehovah's Witnesses had. And then I come to realize that one of the most popular Christian book series about the rapture, that is basically the whole story, is
Yeah.
that this, and I'm like, wow. So no wonder they didn't want people to watch it because they
They
wanted
ripped
people
it
to
off.
think they were something special.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that exactly. Yeah.
My mind was like, I can't believe this.
I can't even imagine being that deep into something and then yeah, man, that's crazy.
So, anywho,
For sure, it's very interesting, and it was awesome to have you on tonight and talk about your experience. With everything, your experience throughout, deconstruction, being in a cult, as well as having a gnosis experience with Jesus and meeting him, and all of that. So I'm thinking I'm gonna end the recording. Maybe we can talk for a little bit after, and then I'll see you as soon as I can see you.
okay, sounds
All right.
good.
Awesome. So I'll catch everybody in the next podcast episode. Hopefully, it'll be soon, and I will see you then.